do a session on HP's server automation product. So server automation essentially does what the name says. It automates functions and lifecycle actions for servers, be it Windows servers, Linux servers, Solaris servers, HPOX, AIX. It's a single interface to be able to manage all of those devices. So you don't need a separate Red Hat satellite box. You don't need a separate NIM box. You don't need a separate Windows deployment server box. It's all contained within this system. When you think about it, you can start getting some of the operations staff the ability to perform functions on some pretty complex machines because they get set up within here. It's a very common interface. It's easy to understand, and they don't need to be a Solaris expert. They can run jobs against the Solaris box just by finding the graphic and telling it to run. So there's two different interfaces that end users look at. One of them is an administrative interface to set the system up initially, and that would be the screen we're looking at here. For server automation, and this is version 10, by the way, the latest and greatest that HP's released, we no longer set up users from within the screen. We can go in and we set up some other things, like loading up the operating systems or the media to be deployed out to my servers. In this case, here's my Windows media. So I can go out and create Windows 2008 R2 servers all day long using this one ISO. So the concept being a one-to-many. I can use this one install media and create 100 servers, all of them with different configurations, but I've only needed one copy of the install media. I can go and take a look at my environment. I can take a look at servers that belong to me, et cetera, et cetera. This screen here is pretty much good for that. Everything else, we move into the graphical user interface. So that's a slight change from the previous versions. We used to do a lot more inside the web interface. Now almost everything is done inside, quote-unquote, the GUI, right? So you'll notice, we have our users are set up in here. We used to do this via the web interface. Now we define them inside the GUI. We set up our customer groups. We set up our user groups inside here and then assign users to it, just like we would have in the GUI. The web interface. But now it's pretty much easier to do, right? I click on it if I want to add users to it. Boom, it's right there, and I would save this thing. It is actually easier to deal with because now I can walk down a tree and see what quote-unquote super users has access to, right? They have access to the different customers, the facilities that exist, and device groups. You notice here we have allow access to all device groups because it's a super user. They're supposed to know what they're doing. Folder permissions within the system. So remember, this is role-based access. So server automation, we hook it into an LDAP instance or an Active Directory instance, and based upon group membership, or I can even go right down to the user ID, I can, block or grant access to actual files on the system for use. The actions that this group can do, right? So the different things this group has access to, all the way down to, virtualization. Do I have access to the middleware package? Can I define the storage systems for servers, et cetera? And then there's other ones where I can launch commands from this interface, like launch my remote desktop for Windows or launch SSH to get into a Linux or Unix box. We grant or deny those accesses here. That's just, one little screen, but it's a difference from version 9. Okay. The different configuration settings, they're all done within here now. This used to be in the web interface. So it ought to look pretty familiar for the tree. Anybody that's used server automation before. Okay, the compliance settings, we just walked through that on administration. If we go up and we take a look at the library is very, very much the same. There is one slight difference. OS sequences are not so much an important thing anymore under server automation. So we used to take that installation media that I talked about a minute ago, and we would say, okay, there's the media, and here's the sequence of what I want to do. I want to use the media to install Windows. I want to run these software policies, meaning, install IIS, for example, or lay down some files, and that is my build. HP has developed what they call build plans now. And the build plans literally allow us to do almost anything we want to. Okay? So if we take a look at a Windows 2012 build plan, here's the properties of it, where it exists, what directory it's in on the server itself. So if you want to come over to the library and go by folder, you can walk down the tree. What is contained in this build plan, right? So we can configure the unattend.xml. That obviously lets me do the silent install, or leverage your unattend.xml. So if you have one that you use to do server builds, you have your computer naming conventions, you have your license in it, you have, partitions set up on your hard drives, that can just be imported in here. It lets us know what configurations that unattend is a part of, what servers it's been used, and what OS build plans that has been used in. Right, so we're able to do that relationship between the different items. Then we stick that unattend inside my install script. Where is my install media? And bang, I'm off and running installing Windows. And you'll notice this is a native setup. Right, this is setup.exe. It's not running a Wim install or a compressed install. Remember, with Wim, we want to make sure we have all the right drivers between the different machines. Sometimes when we're dealing even within the same vendor, there could be a different driver 6 months from now than there was, today, because something internal changed. So pretty much I like to run the setup.exes. That way I know the right drivers get loaded all the time. If we're in a great big hurry, a Wim image does run faster, so we can just go ahead and use that as well, which is provided for in the build plans. If you start going down here and look, you'll see it references as Wim all over the place. So I can take a Windows image and just write it to disk, boot up the machine, and I'm good to go. Run the sysprep, change the server name, change the address, change the the security ID, and that server's ready to go. Right, so that's just that little piece, right? Provisioning, configuration management. So that's that portion of server automation. There's patch management. If you take a look, we have patches. We have patches for Windows and Solaris, et cetera, right? Windows, we start walking down the tree, and you'll see where there's a bunch of patches that are actually available on this system right now. They were pulled in. I pulled in almost everything that was critical. So we can take a look at the patch, and there's information now that gets downloaded with it, right? Some metadata from Microsoft. If we pull a Microsoft patch, we start taking a look at, this one has actually been superseded by another one. It also replaces this other one. What is this patch for, right? What systems is it appropriate for? You can see which ones Microsoft says this patch is appropriate for, just not everything. So if I want to patch, as an example from this little screen here, Windows 2008 standard, not the 64-bit, this patch won't even appear as a viable patch to go to that system. So I make sure that I don't run into that problem. I'll link directly to their knowledge base document. So there's a document straight from Microsoft about this patch, accessible directly from inside Server Automation. It links it out to it. Let's say you as a customer or a user of the system want to have some custom documentation, right? Put something in there that says, this patch is viable for Windows 2008 R2 servers only running SQL 2008 Service Pack 1. You could actually create a little, document, stick it in here so that as people go through, they see that this is available for that. Has this patch been attached to anything? In other words, have I said, created a device group and called it SQL servers and said anything that falls in that realm is going to get this patch? Have I included it in any policies to be assigned to servers or any patch policies, meaning I have we'll get into them in a second, but a patch policy is a group of patches combined together in a logical grouping to be assigned and attached to servers. And does this patch exist on any servers in my environment? So those are just the patches, right? Those are the ones that exist. And when you start seeing these little grayed out icons, they're out there. They just haven't been imported into the system yet. So that brings up a point. What do we do to patch? We leverage the vendor SCCM patching scenario. HP doesn't want to go and reinvent the wheel because that's not worth the time. It's not worth the programming time. Let's take advantage of what the vendors have done, right? So for Microsoft, we leverage their patching process. For Red Hat, we leverage their patching process, putting RPMs out, taking advantage of their satellite servers. For Solaris, their patching process, rather than taking and rewriting the wheel again. So what is a patch policy? Well, a patch policy, like we said, is a grouping of patches that we can put together inside a single set of patches to be applied to a server. So I have a patch policy defined here to go to SQL boxes as an example. And there's 2 patches in here right now. Well, let's say another patch comes out that is important to SQL Server. It has to deal with security, right? So I would come back to my patches, go to my Windows, boxes, and one of these patches just came out. It's very, very important for a security hole inside SQL, for example. I would go ahead and add it to that patch policy. And now when I go back to that patch policy and refresh it, I ought to be able to find what's going on. There it is, right? So I added it, and in real time it comes in. And now here's the interesting thing. How do I attach this to different boxes? So I take a group. I've defined a group of servers. And this group of servers is anything that's running SQL. And I've said any of these servers here attach, quote unquote, this patch policy so that whenever I want to remediate my patches, automatically it goes out and checks all these servers, make sure they're up to date on patching. Well, I just added an item into that patch policy, so when I remediate, it'll go and install that patch on every SQL server that's a part of that group of devices. Okay? I can do compliance checks, et cetera, but in this case, I just wanted to set this group up for patching. Did I include this patch policy in my building of a server, or do I just attach it, to a group that way? Right? I can do scripting. So in the world of the Unix world, I can do a bunch of scripting: native script, bash script, corn shell script, things like that. If you have scripts that you run, they can be imported directly into the system and used. Windows, we can do scripting, right? VB scripts, batch files, Python scripts, anything interpretive, as long as the interpreter exists on the target system. Then I create what we call, a complete software policy. Okay, so what is a software policy? Well, let's go ahead and take a look at one that installs an agent on a system. There's a bunch of packages, or several packages. There can be scripts. There can, be patch policies involved too. So here's what we do. We come in and we say, here's my list of policy items. And this one in particular is truly multi-OS, right? I can go and put in here all these different packages, quote unquote, and attach this to any system I want. But because the package is only good, in this case for some Windows, that package won't even be attempted on a Linux box. Okay? This package here is only good on AIX, so that when I run this against the Windows box, it just skips right over this one, doesn't try to install it. So server automation, when you think about it, is really, really robust in the fact that I can do really multi-OS stuff that ends up with the same end result. So think Java, right? So Sun has Java out there. Java installs on anything. And when you log in, you go to java.com, it just comes up and says install Java. when you say go ahead and install it, they determine what operating system you're running, and they deliver the appropriate version. This is the way that we do this with inside server automation. We make sure the packages know what is viable for them, group them together in a software group, and say, okay, go install that software group on server XYZ, and only the appropriate pieces would be installed. Okay. What servers has this been assigned to and installed on? So there, you can see where I have a list of them. Have I put it inside any operating system builds? No. Have I made changes to it? Well, I've attached it to a bunch of servers. If you take a look here, all right, because this is a cloud test environment as well, servers go and appear and disappear. But you can see where this gets attached to these devices, and then it installs the software appropriately. Okay, so that would be how I could do software in a true multi-OS environment. We can go in and do things directly for Windows servers. If you take a look at what we got going on here, we can get into Windows local security settings, so you can go and install your Active Directory policies in there. You can, if there's a registry hack, as an example that your organization has, you have a different splash screen or a logon screen. It can be attached to the box, coming from within here. It just goes in and installs it in the registry. If you have users and groups that you want attached to a box as it gets built, you can define that users and groups and attach them to a server as it gets built. Then there's also audits, right? So far, all we talked about is building a box, patching it. Well, what happens when things change on that box, right? At some point when I built it, I knew it was just the way I wanted it. Or maybe I'm under, regulatory issues. The government, I run credit cards, or I'm a healthcare provider. The government comes in and says, you have to have these items, these regulations, these security settings set because, we don't trust you. You have to have security set up, so they'll run an audit, or you run an audit, and provide the results to the person that shows up. But there are audits, and HP provides these audits for you if you sign up for their live network service. If I was a live network customer here on the system, I would have audits for Windows, for PCI, for Sarbanes-Oxley, SOX, for HIPAA, Center for Internet Security. They'd be loaded right in here, and I could run them against any of my Windows servers and generate reports. And if there was anything that was non-compliant, right from that report, I could tell it to go fix it. In the case that I'm looking at here, I just generated a SQL audit, for my device, and said, what does it contain, right? I want to go and I put, items in here to go and do things against my SQL servers. I've got a couple of rules, compliance checks, and I pulled out of it a couple of vulnerabilities to check for, as an example. Or I can trust Microsoft and say, run this against the system. These are all of the recommendations they've come up with over the several years of what should be locked down, what patches should be applied, the guest account should be turned off, items like that, right? But what about companies that have what they call a quote-unquote golden image? Some people don't like that term, but we'll just call it my master image. How do I make sure that I haven't drifted away from that master image? What I can do is I can take and snapshot. Now, we're not talking a VMware or a virtual system type snapshot where it's just making a copy of a disk file. I'm looking at the personality of that system, all of the settings. I could actually get down into file structures, files that have to be in directories. Get even deeper. If it's a readable file, a text type file, we can actually make sure there's something inside that file. I had one customer that wanted to make sure that the loopback address was part of their hosts file in all cases. So for Windows, we'd go in and, Windows System 32, drivers, etc. hosts, right? And open the file for inspection with server automation, make sure that the 127.0.0.1 entry was in there. For Linux boxes, go into, Etsy hosts. If it wasn't, it would enter it for you. And that was just one of their rules. So we could actually, take a look at the snapshot all the way down into the contents of a file. Compare against it. So I have a snapshot or an image of my master server image. Everything that the server should look like if it was up to snuff. Take my running servers and compare it against it and see where I stand. Have there been changes? Has the configuration drifted out of compliance? Maybe I take a server that's totally 100% PCI compliant, but I've loaded on top of that some of my corporate issues. So I have a server that's totally PCI and corporate compliant. I can make a snapshot of that server and compare all my running boxes against it. And if any of them are out of compliance, automatically remediate them back into compliance. There's customers that we have that have saved a lot of money when the auditors have showed up. The auditors know that the system exists, and if you present them with reports from it, they don't question a lot, right? Or they can run reports while they're there so that they see that, in real time that you are compliant. They know all about HP Server Automation audit and compliance system, and they trust it. So they can run it. And it saves them time, too, if you think about it. They don't have to run around logging into servers and things. But like I said, there's a lot of customers that have avoided massive, major fines. So that would be that one there. There is the ability. Right? Now we're basically at an infrastructure level. We've put down an operating system. In the world of cloud, that's called infrastructure, right? So infrastructure as a service. The ability to request a system and create the infrastructure. Server automation has the ability to model some applications and install them. HP has a couple of different packages that will do this, but if you look at this, we have the ability to model and look at configurations literally for almost every operating system, except for what Jim and Bob did in their garage down the street with a C compiler. Anything that's major is in here, right? OEL, Red Hat, all the different versions of Red Hat, HPUX, even CentOS, AIX. You'll notice there's one that's not here, and that's Ubuntu. And that's just because it's free. And if you have a free operating system, does it really matter how you manage it? Are you going to spend money on managing it? But we've got Zen, VMware, different versions of VMware. 5 is supported. It's just handled separately from what we're looking at here. All right, so those are configurations, but we provide you some templates for maybe some standard applications. Okay, so we can have templates, sitting in there as well with the content downloads from HP Live Network. So that's just the different types of things we can do, right? If we take a look at the types of packages that we can load on here. So we'll take a look at the types of packages that I can do for middleware, okay? If you look at the directory structure here, I can actually call this here and have a SQL Server installed. We do have a system that will do that in a production-ready mode, but I can call this zip file and unzip it to the hard drive so that my as a service box actually has, my Windows operating system and a directory is the entire SQL installer, and the end user can just, run the installer and set up a system the way they want. So there's different options with what HP gives you. It's not just it's our way or the highway. We fit your business needs, not trying to force you to change your business needs based upon the software we have. From that standpoint, right, we have all these different things. We talked about there's role-based access. That's why up here you see device groups. This would be the ones, anything that belongs to quote-unquote me. That's my user ID. And then we start getting into these public areas, right? And we can create dynamic server lists. So if we take a look at this, we can create server groups and then group servers together. I talked earlier about attaching items into a server group, right? we went into the SQL Server group, and there's actually a patch policy assigned to this server group. So anything that meets the criteria of being a server within the server group would automatically get those couple of patches from the SQL Server policy. So what is the device membership in this one? Any host name that contains the letters SQL. So any host name that's sitting inside here and the letters contain SQL, we can go even deeper, okay? We can set up some properties on the servers, or I can set up, maybe the hypervisor, anything part of a hypervisor. Any server that has installed software, because when a server comes in to server automation, there's an inventory of the software that's created. So if I have Adobe Reader or Adobe Flash, which a lot of companies seem to think there's a security issue with that, the system will know that a Flash is installed. It would make it part of a dynamic group. Maybe we'd call it Flash, right? Device group, dynamic group. We would call it Flash, and part of its membership would be that there's installed software. The installed software name contains, right? So now any server that comes in that has software on it whose name is Flash would appear as a member of this software group. And then I can go and I can do patches against it, for example, to lock down Flash, or to maybe force it to install a copy of McAfee, so I can make sure I'm secure and I don't have people trying to come in and take advantage of that Flash package and break my security. So that, in a nutshell, is Server Automation 10. We can build servers from it, manage servers from it. If you look, anything here that up at the top are servers that exist right now. So this guy, right, he's registered, everything's fine. I haven't run any audits on it. There's no software policies attached to it except what it happens to it when it gets pulled into the system. The inventory, I can take a look at some information about it because I know about it. So when I bring the system in to server automation, we inventory things, right? So it knows about its network interface. It knows that it's a virtual server and it's a member of a particular vCenter, that there was a template that it was created from. This pretty, interesting information in there. And we can actually get all the way down into what users and groups by activating the agent that's on the system. We can get into the registered software, again, activating the agent. We can get into the file system, but because I'm not logged in as admin, I can't get to it. Is there a location maybe that is attached to it? So if I have a rack system, or I have all these blade servers. If it's a blade server, we can actually get information from it as long as the system can give it to us, what rack it's in, what enclosure in that rack, what bay, and get down to what slot, so you know exactly where that device is. How many disks are in the box, how big they are, right? Whether or not it's a spare box, whether it's a RAID configuration, et cetera, et cetera. Are there any relationships with any device groups? So that dynamic group that I created, Flash, if this server had Flash installed on it, Flash would show up here as well. If there's any applications that were installed on it from my application deployment manager, and then again, just your basic information. Server automation is powerful, guys. The ability to run my data center, your data center, from a single console. I'm not going to say pane of glass, but it's a console that allows you to get into all these different kinds of servers, manage their life cycle, soup to nuts, from creating them, configuration management, configuration drift, patching them, running audits against them, running reports against those audits, installing software, removing software, the things that you're computer operators, your system administrators do on a continual basis. But rather than having specialists, your Solaris admins can now do Windows. Windows guys can do some, Solaris admin stuff because it's set up in here, and it's a right-click run. Have a great day, and if you have any questions, please feel free to contact me.